I would like you to tell us a little bit more about the archival work you did. How did the idea of the documentary take shape? In what ways did it change throughout the making? What was your relationship with archival work before making the documentary?
I was trying to figure out Neirud's story and know more about female wrestling and female wrestling in the circus around that time, the 50s, the 60s. And I went to museums and archives and tried very hard to find information in the official archives and found a lot of stuff about male wrestling and not so much or barely anything about female wrestling. And at the same time, the more I talked to people from the circus, from circuses, through some family members and who pointed me out to other circus artists, the more I discovered that they were actually very known at that time, that Neirud was a pioneer and a reference for many other female wrestlers who came after her. So apparently she was very famous, but within the community, the circus community, and not so much in official records. So that to me, I think, was very striking, and one of the motivations that kept me going, this just obsession to then piece her story together and find out more. The lack of documentation, and the lack of photographs, and the lack of records of female wrestling and of her specifically, I think became this kind of like challenge that I really wanted to overcome, like some sort of obsession. That put me through like 10 years of making this film. So a very solid obsession. But I think it's the heart of the film, this question of what are the stories that get to be recorded and saved and protected, and what are the narratives and the stories that don't matter and don't get to be told. It was really hard for me to finally figure out the film structure. But once we did, it became clear that there's a context, a social historical context that needed to be shown in the film to counter Neirud's existence, or to contextualize both existences, Nelly and Neirud, in a broader social way. So we had someone working with us, a professional researcher who did an amazing job, because then she knew the ways of getting certain kinds of footage. And we were able to incorporate in the film those Super 8 images that you see of daily, like, women, like, taking care of children, or like the pageant, or even the dictatorship footage. Those were archival footages that we were able to find through the work with this person, Julia Francischini. But that was really my first time working with that kind of archive. And at some point, we realized that it started to become more and more visible and clear that Neirud was the heart of this film. That she was the reason why I was making the film. She was the person I was obsessed with, finding out about the story. So it has to be her, and it has to be through her eyes. And then when we found the protagonist, then you have to find the antagonist. We went back to like basic screenwriting structure, traditional first, second, third acts, and what are the plots and the different moments, and the antagonist to us was clear that it had to be the context. It had to be society and patriarchy and just all of these forces around her. And then when we found that, we also decided to just follow the film. The structure mimics the same process that I went through, and it follows the order in which I was finding out about her story. So we identified those questions. We identified what were the important, essential, like, mysteries that I wanted to solve. and we sprinkled them, and then we worked very technically in creating a script as we were editing. Like, we created the scripts while editing, but it was very like a work of precision, really, of understanding like what are the questions, when are we going to answer each one of the questions. But I think the main guide was following the same structure of my experience. We had some versions where there was no narration whatsoever. Poor editor, he suffered so much because he's like, give me something, I can't just like put these images together. The story was very personal, so it was clear that, I have been in the film from the beginning in different ways, but I only became a narrator later on when we also understood that it was important that for the audience to really connect with the characters, we really had to share some information about the timeline of my family and like who's who. It's a lot of characters. There were versions where there was no narration and people were like, okay, but who's Rita, who's Neirud, like who's Nelly, like I'm confused, I don't, towards the end I decided that I was going to be a narrator in the film, and really wanted it to not be overpowering. Like, I didn't want my character in the film to become to pick up the attention too much. So we had always Neirud in mind. We're like, are we losing her? Is this becoming too like Fernanda and not so much Neirud? Is this becoming too my dad and not so much Neirud? We had to always like go back to her. And so I trimmed and edited the text over and over and over again, and picked the words and removed everything that was some kind of that had some kind of judgment, about her story. For example, when I find out that she burned all of her costumes and photos because she became part of the church, the evangelical church, there was a version where the narration was a little bit, me judging that, because for my personal, reasons, because I'm like, the church is like, because of the church, I don't have the materials that I wanted, and we showed that to someone who was like, I don't think, you have to really, give her the honor her as an individual who was making choices for herself. It's not about like what you think this represents, or so I cleaned that. There's something extremely interesting to me about what you said, the Tríplice Fronteira, and then I'm going to respond to that question too, or like we can talk about it, because this idea of the alliance, this idea of them existing on the borders, existing on the brink of society, and what was their relationship to that region, where Brazil borders Paraguay and borders Argentina. And they lived, Nelly and Neirud lived in Foz do Iguaçu for 2 years. Foz do Iguaçu is a city that borders Argentina and Paraguay, which I think it's so metaphorically represents this life that they had of existing outside of the norm, and like roaming and existing on the brinks, on the edges, on the fringe of normativity, which I think is very queer. Made me think about like queering borders and how their existence was possible within this territory, this geographic space where there is a lot of exchange and fluidity. So made me think about borders not so much as limitations and separation, but as spaces where alliances can be formed, where exchange can happen. And I think that speaks a lot to their survival knowledge. My dad was the first person responsible for transmitting all of those stories, and the love for the circus and the love for this tradition in my family. But he was also very seductive, like the way he talks and how eloquent, so he was the gatekeeper of the narratives for such a long time. And the film is about breaking up with his narrative and breaking up with the stories that have been told to me, and finding my own vision of what the story is and privileging other characters. My father told me about the wrestling in the circuit when he would always talk about the men. Oh yeah, but I mean, this guy was incredible. Like and I had to kind of at some point like break up with my dad, and that happened also with in the images. Like I decided to like not show him. I'm not going to show him because it's not. This is my personal decision of he is a very important character in the film, and he is, and with my dad, I was bugging him. Like I kept asking questions. I had my video camera like back in the archival. It's kind of funny because I shot that, but it becomes archival in the film. When Neirud talks about the storm and destroying the circus, that was me like filming. I had no idea what I was doing. I was in film school. I had this terrible like VHS or mini DV camera. So I think my dad just got used to the idea, just got used to me being around and having a camera. And then I think something extremely beautiful that happened, this arc that we see of the dead, being someone who was very reluctant in the beginning and insisting in his way of telling the story and trying to, not clearly like trying to dismotivate me, but being not so much into me making this film. And then towards the end, when he says that he made a point in telling me that at Neirud's funeral, he clearly stated to everyone who was there that she was not just Aunt Neirud, but she was my grandma's partner, lover. He told me this in person like that. I was there. Like, I wouldn't be making this film if you had said that, because the film is so much about it's like this question that I'm trying to answer, and he's like, and it was kind of a bit of a fight, but I found it beautiful because it doesn't really matter whatever he said or didn't say. What matters is that towards the end of the process, he really wanted to have said that, and to me that's just the most beautiful. I don't need anything more from him.